You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
Anyone who's ever attempted to buy a plot of land or a house would understand the anxiety that comes with it. Am I being quoted a fair price for this property? Is this seller or builder a genuine party? Am I going to be the victim of fraud in the property market? And at an administrative level, these concerns are further magnified. With a population of more than 1.2 billion, spread over 6 lakh villages and 7,000 cities, one can imagine the kind of serious challenges that the government grapples with when it comes to property regulation. In this episode, we'll be in conversation with the founders of 2 startups in the property rights space who have been exploring how technology can help address some of these pressing property rights related problems. Welcome to the Quint's fortnightly podcast, Land of a Billion. This podcast is produced in association with the Property Rights Research Consortium, or PRRC, which is supported by Omidyar Network India, an investment firm focused on social impact. PRRC is a network of leading think tanks and research organizations working to collaborate and drive policy action in the field of land, housing, and property rights in India. On this episode, we have with us Kshitij Batra, who is the founder of Terra Economics and Analytics Labs, also known as TEAL. TEAL offers end-to-end decision support platform for land and property for banks, housing finance companies, real estate, infrastructure developers, retail investors, and transacting parties. Kshitij is joined by Ashwani Rawat, who is the co-founder at Transserve Technologies, which works to provide geospatial solutions to address complex problems related to the urban setup, like inventorying the cities and its assets, revenue enhancement, census using mobile computing, and land records modernization. Kshitij and Ashwani, thank you so much for joining us on Land of a Billion. Let's get started. So the goal of our podcast is to understand what it takes to secure land rights for a billion. In all our episodes so far, we've been hearing from academics and policymakers on what the government is and could be doing to achieve this objective. But clearly there's space for private players and startups as well here. So can we start by talking about what are some of these broad challenges in India which tech-based organizations such as yourselves can and have set out to tackle? Ashwani, would you like to start?
So let me first begin by helping you understand the problem at hand. Until very recently, most of the land records available in the country were in hard copy formats. And these maps were prepared in several years ago, and most of them date back to British era. So mass scale digitization program began a few years ago, and since land is a state matter or a state subject, we have seen various stages of maturity of land records in these different states. But it is disheartening to see that the maturity has not grown with the time. So let me just fast forward to today and talk about specific land problem. So the problem of land titling to slum dwellers in our cities. So marginalized population primarily working in major urban growth centers have been badly hit by unplanned sprawl of cities. Generation of slum dwellers stay on a land parcel for which they don't exist at all, and they are always in a fear of eviction. So these are a few of the major challenges, and apart from that, government have not taken enough initiative to build the capacity within the departments to deploy right technology to just modernize the entire land records or cadastral records, which has become sort of a roadblock and had led to a lot of cases in litigation. So these are the few challenges that I believe India is facing as of now.
So I think the context in India is that India has had ancient settlements for a long period of time. Land is very contested. There's a lot of pressure on it, a lot of competing claims, a lot of heterogeneity and diversity, as Ashwini was mentioning. So you have, various different languages and systems of recording, land transfers, and, there's informality and informal property rights. In conjunction with that, there's different stages of colonization and how bureaucracy has been kind of rolled out in different administrations over hundreds of years. So we have a very complex sort of a set of challenges to work with, right? So in a way, I mean, I would say that the real meat of the problem really starts with how governance is done and managed, and the government sort of role is quite primary here, right? We have to address that obviously we are technologists, we're working with technology, but it's not something that can replace the core kind of role of the states to protect property rights, right? So what we're trying to do with technology here is to solve the information asymmetry problem, and we're trying to streamline access to that information so that it is efficient, equitable, it's less costly, and transaction costs are reduced in terms of property transactions, in terms of lending against land, in terms of dispute resolution, right? And so I think the context that we always discuss is that you have a large amount of litigation that's stuck up in civil courts that has to do with land and property cases, right? 2/3 by some estimates. These are the cases that take the longest to resolve, more than 20 years. And you have this weird situation in India where you have the largest asset class, which is real estate, right? So 77% plus of household savings are in real estate in India, which is much higher than anywhere else in the world. In China, it's around 60%, US less than 50%, but yet you have limited mortgage to GDP ratio, which is that India has around 10% mortgage to GDP ratio, in China it's 18%, in the US is 56%. So why does this kind of contradiction really happen, that you have a huge dependency on real estate collateral, or huge dependency in terms of household portfolios on real estate, but you're not able to leverage that collateral really well, right? So there's an issue in terms of the primary market, so buying and selling of land and property. There's an issue in terms of being able to borrow against that land, be able to leverage that collateral. And then obviously there's an issue in terms of dispute resolution when it comes to being able to figure out, okay, this property has clean title, how long the cases take to resolve. But I think from the private sector perspective, from the non-governmental sector perspective, we have to put it in context as to what we can really solve. So for us at Deal, we're trying to work on essentially taking information that is there from official sources, from different government documents around land records, around property information, from municipal records and so on and so forth, and the courts, and figure out whether we can just essentially reduce the barriers to accessing that information, right? And so it's a much more humbler type of application in the larger gamut of land and property related problems that exist. So that, I think that just to contextify it a little bit, I think I would say that the real set of solutions has to start with the state.
I think both of you have nicely laid out the history of land records. Firstly, Ashwani, how the legacy of the colonial state is still with us and the extent to which land records are fragmented. And Kshitij, access to information becomes doubly important in such a context, especially with the different bureaucratic regimes that are at play here. Ashwani, you already started talking about this, but if you could walk me through one key challenge in the property rights space which your organization has been working towards.
So in case of transfer, we have always believed that location is a great unifier of heterogeneous data sets. Accurate mapping of land parcel and tagging them to land ownership database through triangulation techniques helps solve most of these problems by and large. One of the key learning that we have had from various projects, particularly I'll talk about Odisha Jaga Mission and our work in rural areas in Gujarat. Involving community in the mapping exercise helps in a great deal in solving the major disputes. We have also read about similar initiatives in various countries in Africa too. And deploying the right technology in field, because the technology has really grown very fast in the last 20-25 years. So if I talk about technology, I would emphasize particularly on a GNSS technology.
Sorry to cut you there, Ashwani. I just wanted to expand on what you mentioned about GNSS technology. So for those of you who may not be aware, GNSS refers to the Global Navigation Satellite System, and it is used by land surveyors around the world to determine precise locations, since it's easier and faster to use than other surveying methods.
Land is a very expensive commodity, and we have to deal with it in very, very careful manner. We have very complex legal framework. So we cannot really allow a lot of disputes coming in. We already have enough problems in hand to solve. So the right technical intervention would really help the communities to come together and then solve these major problems. In the maps, if you see the legacy map, the way they were prepared, and then the technology which is being used for mapping out the land produced a different kind of results. So if you just take an example of village, you would find plenty of disputes in that village itself. Though people are living in harmony, but the moment you go for a resurvey and try to put the entire system in digital form would invite a lot of trouble. For that, the community involvement becomes extremely important. So these challenges, as well as few technical intervention, as well as involvement of community, all together put together, can really solve the problem to a large extent. But yes, there would certainly be few disputes always towards the end.
And Kshitij?
So our mission is to be able to try to simplify the otherwise very complex and opaque nature of this entire land and property space, right? So what we do is so land is a state subject in India, right? So every state has a completely different set of laws, rules, jurisdictions, governance agencies, what matters and what doesn't. So first we have a strong research team that goes in, starts documenting and structuring all of these different types of rules, right? To see what matters, and that itself is a complex task. And a lot of agencies, things that you don't even, agencies that you never have heard of. For instance, in Delhi, we were surprised to know of this agency called the Delhi Urban Arts Commission, which is there to preserve the aesthetic nature of the city of Delhi. It actually matters quite a bit when it comes to dealing with land and property, various different types of jurisdictions. So right now we deal with more than 637 agencies across 9 different states in terms of getting access to different types of information on land and property in terms of what matters, right? So first is the research part to document that. Then we have a data team that goes and starts collating information from all of these different sources, which are quite diverse. They're in different languages across different states, different dialects, different terminologies. Then you have the cadastral maps, which obviously have non-text and they have spatial information, right? So to be able to harmonize it, to be able to link it at a property level, to be able to make it searchable, and to be able to build a series of analytics on top of it that can give some guidance on what the risk associated with that individual property is, and same thing in terms of value. So for lending institutions, which is our primary customer base that we started with, is to figure out what is the risk value trade-off, right, when it comes to lending against a land parcel or a property. Right. So I would say that most of our work is still very much a work in progress. We're working in early stage in now, 9 different states with various different sources of data. And we're working with a few lending institutions to be able to get the information retrieval part, which is to find information at a property level from all these different databases. And another big one are the different courts, which are all different jurisdictions. What we're also working on in parallel are to be able to score these properties, similar to an equivalent of like a CIBIL score for each of these property parcels, right? And the same thing in terms of valuation, to be able to figure out what the true market value of these properties are. And that same application then applies also to end users. So consumers can also look at it for when they have to buy or sell a property. It can be used by law firms. We're also trying to work with different government entities, but those have been very slow processes. We're at a relatively early stage. I wouldn't claim to say that we have had kind of very large impact so far, but what we have put together is a database of several million properties in each city. So in Delhi we have a database of close to 3 million properties, right? And so what it allows you to do is in real time check whether there is a dispute on this, in real time check whether the title is clean, whether mutation has been done, whether property tax payments are complete. So that's the I think gamut of things, but we have a long way to go still.
Right. It's fascinating to hear about the scale at which you're trying to solve this problem. Before we go ahead, Ashwani, I was curious to learn more about the Jaga mission you spoke about, and maybe if we can delve deeper into the role that Transerve played.
Yeah, so we partnered with government of Odisha, which came up with this landmark legal framework to award property rights to slum dwellers, particularly in urban nodes of the state. So this decision would pave way for nearly 2 lakh households to get permanent rights over the property where they have stayed for decades. But a problem as large as this requires a solution which would narrow down the time frame of implementation. So Transerve, through his tech stack, we call it Transerve Online Stack, assisted the implementation agencies leveraging various data sets such as drones, legacy maps, and contact surveys to triangulate the ownership of a land parcel, giving way to a clear title of the land. This eventually paved way to thousands of slum dwellers get rights to their property, which has helped in tough times like recent pandemic and several natural disasters. The slum dwellers get to avail schemes like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana to build permanent structure and also get an unprecedented opportunity to upwardly mobile and get better financial inclusion. This problem was dealt at 2 levels. One was this at a state level, and then at the district level governance, and then finally we went down till the Slum Dwellers Association. by taking proper data from all the agencies, by taking proper permission, and then taking this slum dweller association in confidence, showing them the entire drone map along with the contact survey data to them, and telling them, okay, this is the place where we are going to rehabilitate you, which is close by to your the place of economic activity. So we are not just throwing you out of the city, we're still keeping you inside. So building that kind of a confidence, taking the district level governance in mind, it has helped and them to just gain the confidence that here is the government, here is the agency just to take care of us now. And then provided them with the land title ultimately by just maintaining the entire social fabric. Apart from that, this entire legal framework was designed in such a way that this land parcel given to each of the family cannot be converted into a real estate. It can be inherited, it can be mortgaged. Basically, property was in the name of both husband and wife, so that they shouldn't be one gender which is left out of that entire better financial inclusion. So it has been done in a very academic way, just to help them out in, first of all, gaining the confidence on government, and second, then having a better financial security, and then getting rid of that fear of eviction ultimately.
Yeah, I think that helps. I think understand one of the key challenges that you're also facing. So, is there anything about impact that you'd like to share, Ashwani?
Basically, the entire goal was to provide land titling to almost like 2 lakh households. But the latest information that I have from government is that they have achieved somewhere around 50,000 plus land titles has already been awarded to the slum dwellers so far. So yeah, probably like more than 2 lakh people have been benefited so far with this legal framework. Yeah.
Okay, great. And so something that's maybe recurring in both your responses is also the kind of amount of sensitive data that's collected, and the need for like an informed consent process throughout this process of gathering data. In some cases, primary data, and in some cases secondary data that's already out there. So especially since both of you all also work with the government and private organizations that could stand to benefit from a lot of the data in ways that can help with equity and access, and in some cases can also make that more difficult and challenging. So I wanted to learn about some of the ways that both your organizations are thinking about privacy and data protection and informed consent. If we can start with Kshitij.
So none of the data, so we don't actually go and collect any new primary data on individuals. So what we use is we use government records, which will have primary identifiers, individual identifiers. So we try to make sure that there is a pretty robust pipeline where we can have safeguards, such as, for instance, restricting certain types of information access. So we don't provide ungated access to information which will allow you to look at primary identifiers of individuals along certain types of properties. We use pretty comprehensive logs of who is accessing what. We have a consent form which shows up when there is trying to access sensitive type of information. And we provide that information also to whoever is looking at it, to know that this is being tracked in case later on there is some kind of issue, right? Overall, though, I would say that the information around land and property is something that is public in society. That is not something that should be private, in the sense that there are claims on land, and individuals' claims and their description of the rights on land should be public information. And that is the case in most countries around the world as well, right? So, for instance, land records, deeds information is in book 1, for instance, which is meant to be public, right? There are things that are not in the public domain which we don't deal with. For instance, if there are individual wills within families, right? So that's something that cannot be declared in public, as you can imagine that if there are issues within families, you don't want to reveal that publicly, right? So we don't access that, right? So I think the caveat is that we try to make sure whatever safeguards we can put in place in terms of who is accessing that information, that sort of is not abused in any way or misused in any way, right? But ultimately, the underlying information is something that has to be in the public domain, some form or another, for everyone to see in a society when you are discussing claims on land and claims on property.
Uh-huh. And Ashwani, would you like to share Transurf's approach in dealing with user data?
So I'll start with the privacy policy first. So we have a privacy policy in place, So the consent is required from the government and the public, as well as we have our own consent as too. So we have designed our entire technology to keep the aspect of data security with utmost importance. Having deployed solutions for various government and corporate customers, we have ensured that we follow global standards of data security when it comes to handling both spatial and non-spatial data. Further, our platform goes through stringent audits by a certain impaneled agency after every major updates are rolled out. In order to learn and build a state-of-art solution, we have gone through the best certification available in the country. Lastly, we are very clear about data ownership concerns of our users. So our technology is intended to be a conduit for them to collect and analyze data. The ownership of raw and processed data always lies with the customer. Apart from that, we have technologies like blockchain. So this entire technology is blockchain enabled. So if you do any changes, it can be traced easily. This has become extremely important in last few years when the hackers across the globe has become more smart. Even we have seen the number of attacks happening on our cloud server has been going up every year. So just keeping, first of all, anonymity of the data is extremely important. And second, is keeping it secure from the hackers world is necessary.
Right, yes. And just transitioning from one area where disputes and consent is important to another. So early on in our conversation, we briefly spoke about disputes over property rights. Could we discuss the role that technology could play in addressing this urgent area of concern?
So now, I mean, I would say that the first order of business has to be, faster dispute resolution by the courts, right? There's no substitute, for that. There is, judicial pendency. There is, huge amount of administrative reforms that need to take place. There needs to be, faster access to, quicker hearings and, all those types of things, right? So those we can't get away from. I think what we, are much more sort of simply trying to do is just to improve that access to that information on which properties may have a dispute, right? And what the nature of that dispute is and how critical it is. And to that extent, you can expect maybe if it does have some success in the long run, you would presumably have more efficient routing of those cases, or perhaps even settlement or avoiding further disputes, because okay, that there is some kind of issue or title is unresolved on this property and so on and so forth, right? Actually, I think the more interesting application in a way could be the improvement in terms of activity of real estate market. So when it has to come to greater number of transactions that can happen, right? Because it takes very long right now to have transactions in real estate. It's very costly in India. The time to do it is quite significant. So if that cost of the transaction is reduced, it will actually be beneficial for the market. It could improve access to affordable housing, improvement in rental markets, and so on, right? The second is in terms of the lending activity, which I mentioned, right? So if you're able to reduce the cost of being able to assess collateral better, then it improves the ability of financial institutions to lend against property, right? Given how important it is as an asset class, if it leads to increase lending against different types of land and property parcels, that could be obviously a very positive kind of impact without necessarily reducing the number of pending civil disputes when it comes to land.
So Teal's approach works to prevent disputes from occurring in the first place. And Ashwini, could you share Transurf's approach in addressing India's overwhelming number of property-related disputes?
There are technologies which exist where we can resurvey the entire country in a very short period of time. When I say short period, means in a time frame of like 2 to 3 years. If there is a political will in the government and then there is a will to invest, because the modernization of the entire land record across the nation would add few percentage to our GDP growth. That's for sure, and it's a known fact. So, in order to build the trust of people when the land transaction happens, we have to deploy the technology to map out each and every corner of the nation. The last great survey was done in the British era, and then there has been few additions to that survey by an organization like Survey of India or various cadastral departments. But there has not been activity, though it was attempted by the previous government in NLRMP initiative.
That's the National Land Records Modernization Program.
it did not see what it was intended to see ultimately. This technology has become so precise that imagine if you have a land parcel and you know that's your land parcel, and tomorrow a flood comes and wash out all your boundaries, still you'll be able to locate those coordinates on the ground very, very precisely. And when I say precisely, means to the order of like few centimeters accuracy. So this kind of a technical intervention and then willpower to implement such a large scale initiative would definitely give a lot of confidence.
Mm-hmm. Right. If you can discuss a little more about Transurf's role in this context. We've already spoken about the Jaga mission, but I was curious to know if there's any other aspect of your work that pertains to dispute resolution or making this process less cumbersome.
So there are again two aspects to that. One is the involvement of community, and the second is that explaining the community about the technology. I give you an example of Odisha, where the Slum Dweller Association was actively involved in the entire process of data collection. And then second was a case in Gujarat where we worked in a rural area along with the village panchayats, and we gave them a brief overview about the technology, and we said, you give us your plot and we will going to stake out the coordinates of your plot blindly, just with the help of this DGPS equipment, which gave them a lot of confidence. And then you would not believe that the participation was overwhelming. People came to us and requested us to map out their parcel and give them the coordinates of their parcel, though they had no clue about the coordinates at all. But the activity itself developed so much of confidence in the community that they felt satisfied that someone can blindly map out my boundaries after doing one set of a resurvey, and they can locate my plot. This means that technology has some merits. So I think this kind of a confidence we need to build only by the participation of the communities at a national level. And I think the governance in India is wonderful. We have been in this democratic state from last 70-75 years. So I believe that participation at a village panchayat level, or when it comes, or a municipal level, would help government to fix some of those crucial things. So at Transurf, we have developed those technical capabilities within the company. Be it a Transurf online stack, be it a geospatial technology related algorithms, be it QRS network. When I say QRS network, is continuously operating reference station, which is a GPS technology to map out the land with accuracy of few millimeters. Combine all of them together has basically proved that mapping of or resurveying the land parcel again would not be a challenge at all. And then once we have a community participation, then this problem can be fixed very, very quickly in the entire country.
Mm-hmm. I think there are several different moving parts that we've covered, and I'm just thinking about Ashwani, your emphasis on the need for community participation, and it just shows how tech-based solutions must be modeled based on ground-level expectations and circumstances. And Kshitij, I appreciated that Teal was making use of publicly available data with the hope of making buyers, or different stakeholders rather, more aware of what's going on with the land that they're interested in. My next question is a little more future looking, and it's a question that we ask all our guests, and I think Ashwani, you've already taken us in that direction. It's, what will it take to secure land rights for 1 billion going forward?
Well, Abhishek, I have two words for you, and I strongly believe in those two words. That is data democratization. We have to collect data in a democratized way. And being a democratic country, we understand the power of democratization. Tech landscape has changed the way we think to solve major problems in our country. Creating better data set has never been easier than what it is today. The ecosystem needs better tools to process, analyze, and create insights from these data sets to help decision makers and the citizens alike. Further, from a strategic perspective, I strongly advocate the usage of frugal solutions to address the low-hanging fruits in terms of solving the massive problem of property ownership. Creating better data set has never been easier than what it is today. The internet has penetrated, in every corner of the country. We have mobile computing devices now, which can help in collecting the data to precise accuracy. And then the ecosystem needs better tools to process, analyze, and create insights from these available data set to help decision makers and the citizens alike.
So I will definitely agree with Ashwini in that we need to democratize access to information. We have a long-standing discussion around digitization of land records. There's no way around it. I think we have to, ensure that that process, continues. It, continues in a much more faster, efficient, and transparent manner. That information is made accessible in public portals for everyone to access. Because as we know, if we talk about particularly low-income communities, low-income households, there the constraints of access to information are more binding, right? So the cost of being able to access that data and access that information on who owns what property and what rights do they have on that property is much more critical when it comes to the housing, so low-income housing, and also lending against low-income kind of housing in smaller parcels of land, right? That's where the costs bind most for financial institutions. So we have to start with that aspect, and so even for us at TEAL, we rely on public information. We rely on information that has been made available by different government entities and digitized, and that's how the records are supposed to be kept across different contexts in other countries around the world as well, right? So that's, I think, where we need to think about how we can reduce access to that kind of otherwise very obscure type of information from all different sources. So it could be, from the government entities to be able to digitize and make available those records, the courts to be able to link it and make sure that we can figure out quickly what disputes there are. And then what non-government entities like us can do is to be able to figure out where technology plays a role, right? So what we do is we try to bring together, at TEAL, we try to bring together this data from all of these different sources. We run a series of algorithms that use AI ML when we can to be able to clean these records, to be able to translate them, to be able to extract the relevant entities, to be able to link them, to be able to score them. When I talk about the CIBIL equivalent, for a property level, we try to grade the properties with the TEAL score. We try to estimate the market valuation. So we try to bring together these type of different ways to give a bit more transparency and give a bit more visibility to otherwise a sector which is quite obfuscated in terms of all of these different elements, right?
Thank you, Kshitij and Ashwani, for joining us on Land of a Billion. It was great to have you both on the show and to learn more about TEAL and Transurf's exciting work.
Thank you, Abhishek. It is such a pleasure to be here for this podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Abhishek. Ashwani, it was wonderful talking to you, and great that you are doing this effort. I think it's a very important set of questions you need to discuss more for a broader audience.
Sure. Thanks, Kshitij. Thanks.
What did you think of our conversation with Ashwani and Kshitij? What is the role that technology could play in improving access to secure land rights? We'd love to hear from you. So do send us a tweet or message. We're PRRC_India on Twitter. And if you like this episode, we have several more coming. Subscribe to us so you don't miss out on any. We're available wherever you get your podcasts from, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and JioSaavn. Take care, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint's website and check out our other podcasts.